Thank you.
Okay, great. So now that we're properly recording, yes, so we're going over how Istio analyzers work, and the goal of this meeting is to kind of walk through the architecture and process of building them in practical terms. So what we're looking at here with this diagram, this kind of shows how we have our inputs based on what's on the Kubernetes API server, or YAML files, or a combination of the two. What happens is we combine those into a resource snapshot that we then pass to the analyzers, and the analyzers can then actually use that snapshot, look at resources and relationships between these resources, and use that to generate validation messages that are the output. So this is cool because we can use it not only in the command line case, but also actually update status fields on live resources. So we have this functionality coming down the pipe as well. And it gives us kind of a unified library that can handle multiple cases for a number of different things. All right, so let me jump over to looking at an example of an existing analyzer. So here is the kind of a simple analyzer that implements this API, and it's pretty straightforward. We have an interface to represent analyzer. It needs to have a metadata method that returns information about the analyzer, and an analyze method that actually does the analysis. So the important things to note here, for analyze, there's this context object here, and this is important for two things. This gives you access to the snapshot so that you can look through the resources in the snapshot, and it also gives you methods where you can report any issues that come up. So this is where you generate the validation messages. So this is a very simple analyzer case where we're just looking through the gateways for a virtual service and saying, okay, for each gateway that this virtual service defines, does it actually exist? If not, we're going to report this validation message. So before I go any further, does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, great. The other important aspect of this is the metadata, where for each analyzer, we're defining a name, but even more importantly, we're defining the set of inputs that it uses. This is an important property because it lets us be smart, not only about which resources we actually gather, but also about which analyzers we choose to run in different contexts. So for example, if we have an analyzer like this one that looks at virtual service destinations, it cares about things like the what services are visible. So, and that's the hosts field on the virtual service destination entries. In some circumstances, that may not be available. For example, if you are running Galley with service discovery disabled, or maybe you're running with files only and you aren't including files that define all your services, in which case it doesn't really make sense to run that analyzer. So having this set of inputs lets us say, okay, we know we're running in a context where we aren't going to know about these service entries, therefore we can skip over this particular analyzer. So this is, I've actually got a PR that splits this so that it's more granular. In general, it's a good idea for analyzers to be granular based on their required inputs, so that in this particular instance, for example, that we can say, okay, well, we're going to skip over checking those host entries, but we still want to check the destination rules. So other places, kind of touch points, if you're creating an analyzer, there is a registry of analyzers where all of the analyzers are listed. So any new analyzer that's created should also get added here. And there is a test harness where you can define test cases against a particular analyzer, provide an input YAML file that has positive and negative examples, and you can list out the expected errors that you'll run into. And we can look at this in some more detail. Again, does anybody have any questions so far?
No.
One just question about terminology. So, for example, you say like the runtime objects, like for example the system services. This is what you call the runtime or the services, the synthetic services, right? Could I read it in the code right or?
Right. So you notice that synthetic service entries. Let me jump back to where we're defining the resources available in our snapshot. So there is this, there's a metadata.yaml that defines kind of all of these resources, all the different types that we care about. And one important thing to keep in mind is that the analysis that we're doing is based on proto objects. So we're not looking at YAML directly, we're looking at proto objects. So another way to think about this is we're taking advantage of some of the existing galley pipeline to translate YAML into proto objects. And we're doing that before we run the analysis. So there isn't necessarily a one-to-one mapping between Kubernetes resource names and what's here. There's a lot of them are really close, but like you notice, there's the synthetic service entries that is actually generated. And we have that defined here. And there is a, it's kind of out of scope for this particular meeting to get too deep into that, or maybe it isn't, I don't know. You guys can let me know what you think. But there is a transform object that takes as inputs some of the Kubernetes resources and creates as output this synthetic service entries based on the actual pods and services and deployments and so forth. But one thing it's important to pay attention to is the list of resources you have available are going to be the union of the snapshots in this metadata.yaml file. So the collections here define kind of what you can be looking for. And if you need to know the translation functions between things, it's like a lot of things just map directly, for instance. And usually the names are pretty easy to intuit based on that. There's only a couple of places where we are getting a little bit more complicated. So one other thing that does bring up is because we're doing this kind of post-translating out of Kubernetes space, because we want this to be as generic as possible so that it works for non-Kubernetes things as well. In general, the analyzers should, where possible, try to be independent of Kubernetes and independent of Kubernetes objects. That said, there are definitely cases where there's a lot of value in doing some maybe more Kubernetes specific checks that they're valuable to the customer. And yes, they may not apply everywhere, but they're still worth having. So that's allowed. Again, this is another place where registering the inputs is important, because it means if we're in the future, if we have non-Kubernetes stuff coming in and we want it to work, then we can just skip Kubernetes specific analyzers. Lucas, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because we have in Chiari, we have a large number of validation. Well, it's the same as analyzer, but yes. I guess that in most of them, we also try to combine with Kubernetes objects. Probably we can just start with just try to provide or to migrate to these analyzers some of the, the same use case that you presented, just involving Istio objects, and probably what we can do is to try to collect what we would need from Kubernetes to analyze. For example, I'm thinking, just imagine that you have a destination rule. Something that Kiali tried to add value is, okay, this destination rule is targeting to a deployment that doesn't exist because it's bad labeling or things like that. So the destination are going to reach this service, right? And I was wondering how, but yeah, as you said, that probably could be a phase 2 or a next step, right?
Yeah, so, and I've actually got, I actually started with the Kiali version of this analyzer to kind of get me started on this. But this analyzer we have is looking at, it's not looking at it is looking, I'm tripping over my tongue. It's looking at the hosts in destination rules. So there's this check destination host, and this is, it's using this lookup table that's been created, but the lookup table is based on the service entries. So there's hold on, there's two things. That's right, because there's the manually defined service entries, and then there's what's actually there based on Kubernetes, and that's the synthetic service entries. So let me find where I'm actually referring to this. I can type. Come on. Oh. There we go. Okay. Right. So we have check destination host. It's looking at the manually defined service entries, and then it's looking at the synthetic service entries. So we do have some capability to handle the Kubernetes specific stuff, and kind of the reasoning behind having this synthetic service entries is that it's a platform independent layer for getting these services. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, I see. And who is which module is responsible to provide the synthetic service entries? Is something that is provided by Mixer, or
it's in Galley.
In Galley, okay.
Right. Yes. So what's happening is the analyzer framework is built in Galley, so it can run as part of Galley. The case where we're updating the status field on resources that I mentioned before, it can also run through the command line. But what the command line is doing is it is spinning up bits of Galley and plugging them together. And so this uses the same logic as Galley for defining these things. So the same platform independent layer as Galley is using for service discovery gets used here.
Okay, so and the service discovery from Galley is going the model to provide this abstraction, right? Service discovery will be just to put in some kind of caching of controller, just listening for new services that will translate to the synthetic service entries that you are showing here, right?
Right, because Galley is listening to the Kubernetes API server for any updates or changes. So as new services come online, then it would turn those into synthetic service entries. In the command line case, we're just getting a one-time snapshot rather than kind of continuously watching it.
Okay.
But even in the live case, the analysis is done on snapshots. So every once in a while, usually either when something changes, when something changes, but with a debounce, so that we limit the rate of change, it generates a snapshot, and that snapshot is run through the analysis. All right, let's see what else did I have on here. So the examples we've got in the code so far are, I'm hoping they're good examples and they're illustrative. Ed has been working on some more as well that add to this a bit more, which is great and really helpful. One of the things that we recognize is the way we have done it so far may not be the best way. So please don't assume that we're are set in our ways at this point. there's definitely room to change kind of the practices and the way that that we're going about building these things. I guess the basic interface, the API interface, where we have our analyzer interface is fairly solid at this point, but even that we can change if we end up needing to. So if you have ideas or things that don't work, please don't be shy about what they are. See other things I wanted to point out. Okay, so what we have, the analysis framework as it stands, is primarily aimed at multi-resource validation. If you have a case for single object validation, where for some reason it doesn't fit in the existing single object validation code or options that we have, then that can go here, and that does make sense. So an example is an analyzer Ed just wrote, where our single object validation that we run with the webhook and so forth doesn't allow deprecated fields, or rather, we don't have any warning level output to that. So we couldn't stick a check for deprecated fields where we want to merely warn the user rather than blocking them from applying things. We couldn't put that there, so Ed created an analyzer for it, which is great. So we have that now, and we can add more stuff like that as it makes sense. All right, so the next part is where I'm hoping to get involvement from people besides me. I think it would be cool to actually walk through building a simple analyzer together. But here's the tricky part. If possible, I would like somebody other than me to do it. Anybody up for that?
Sorry, I cannot. I don't have the latest version of Istio. I should prepare my IDE. I guess that we can do from the next session. We can do our homework and try to build one analyzer with some ideas and just to provide feedback. Probably I don't know if others from my team have started.
Yeah, that's okay too. Do you guys think that would be a good use of time? Okay, Ed, what were you going to say?
Well, I've already built some. Are you just asking for someone to drive, or are you trying to walk somebody through it?
So what I was kind of hoping for is seeing if we could, as a group, kind of walk through this. So I should point this out, there is a README under Galley package config analysis that kind of walks through, hopefully, everything you need to know to create an analyzer. And it's got some example stuff. And if you guys agree that this would be a good use of time, then we could have somebody drive and try to walk through just kind of building an analyzer together. If you'd rather just poke at it on your own and then we could follow up with any questions or concerns that come up, I'm okay with that too.
Before to do the handout session, I have a couple of questions probably more theoretically.
Oh yeah, okay, sure.
How do you think about it? Because one of the features that we try to introduce in Kiali are validation that are summarized per namespace. For example, one of the features that Kiali offers to the user is that the book info namespace may have a TLS enabled for the namespace level. So, and if it's, for example, if there is something that is not fully defined, for example, if the TLS configuration is present, but you don't have the destination rules that we need also to enable TLS at namespace level, my question is where, for example, this kind of situation, where should look for the status, because from logical perspective of the user is at namespace level, but this is something that Galei is running the analyzers, and Galei need to print out some kind of resource in the status or in a TLS object or a destination rules object, both. So yeah, my main question is, okay, how do you envision that, for example, this kind of validation that could involve several resources, but probably the namespace would be a nice place to locate them. If you have thought about it, or do you have some idea, or is something that is more for the future?
So you mean, just to make sure I understand your question correctly, you're saying when you're in an analyzer and trying to do some logic, being aware of the namespace of the resources you're looking at.
Yeah, for example, imagine that that we want to enable TLS in Bookinfo, right? And we create the configuration, but we miss to provide the destination rule, right? The analyzer probably will just to update the status in the TLS, something like, okay, probably this TLS needs is missing a destination rule configuration or something like that, right? But I wonder if if this may happen when we have several resources involved. For example, if that may happen also, we want to add the status at namespace level.
I see. Yes. So you're talking about right. So you're saying like attaching a status to the namespace.
Exactly. I know that is something that is breaking the rules because it's trying to have some status outside of Istio, but probably is where the user would look about it, right? So yeah, I know that this probably is a complex question, but yeah, it's something that in Kiali is more easy because what we do is to provide an API that validate
Yeah.
an namespace, right? And it's the result is to respond to that. So, and I was wondering how to try to add this kind of logic also inside LA to.
Right. Okay. So if we wanted to do namespace level validation, we can in fact do that, where we say, okay, this namespace is essentially we could say this namespace is misconfigured, or we think you should change something about how this namespace is configured. I think we may actually have that here. So David Ebo. So this is one where we're basically checking to see if the it's looking at the Istio injection equals enabled. I don't know that we are. Oh yeah, here we are. So we actually generate a warning level message here.
Oh, okay.
Attached to the namespace. Now, that said, I don't think right now, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think right now that I will create a status field on the namespace.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. That probably
So,
we are.
So that particular detail is something that we are aware of. We're thinking about it. I don't think anybody has actually worked out the details of whether we can attach something directly to whether we can attach a status field directly to the namespace resource, or maybe we need to have a special CRD object that just has status fields on resources that we can't attach a status field to directly. We've got a few different ways we could potentially go about it, and that's something that is still kind of pending work, trying to figure out exactly what to do that. We can certainly do the analysis and discover the problem.
A report object per namespace would be great. I guess that could be just, if we can query, okay, give me the report, validation report for Bookinfo namespace, something like that.
So, and that's another feature, I guess, that I have on a list. We don't currently have a way to restrict analysis to a particular namespace, but that's something that we can and should add. Right now, if you're running as part of Galley, if it's running live in Galley, it will be paying attention to whatever Galley is paying attention to. I believe that's the correct behavior in that live case, but we should make sure that Galley can be correctly restricted down if we don't want it paying attention to all the namespaces. For the command line case, I think that should be something the user can specify. So you're asking the right questions. There's definitely areas of work still to be done.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So any further questions on that or anything else? So, okay, so going back to, do we want to try to walk through building one? Another if you guys think that isn't the best use of time, I'm okay with doing something else. I know Ed and David have both been working on building analyzers, and so you have very recent, fresh experience and feedback that maybe we could talk about, or maybe things that you ran into. No? Okay.
I mean, I was successful in writing one analyzer. I didn't come prepared for feedback, so you kind of take me.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, generally, I was successful. It took me a little while to wrap my head around it, but I thought the process was relatively palatable.
I had no real difficulty writing it. One thing we should talk about is what validators we want for 1.4.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah.
People have been asking about validation of annotations, like if you misspell one, what should happen? That would be a nice validator. So I think there's several work items about that. I don't know if we have a catch-all for them so that we can sort of divide up that work.
We don't have a, I guess, canonical list of specific validators we want. I have so far been kind of trying to take inspiration from what already exists in Chiali and Istio Vet. Those are things that have basically proven their usefulness to some level.
So how much of Istio Vet have you covered already?
Not a lot.
Okay. Yeah, so that seems like an obvious source of inspiration to start converting them one by one. I mean, if they make sense.
I haven't looked at Istio Vet, but just a list of what it does would be handy to make a work item out of for this port.
Yeah, give me a...
doc page is pretty good. So
I mean, I've used Istio Vet, but I've even put a PR on it, but I never actually inventoried what it does and what it doesn't do.
So I've got this, there's this handy doc that I wrote a little while back that just kind of surveys the existing space of tools. And so here's what Istio Vet covers today.
Yeah, so it's about 8 or 9 analyzers.
Yeah, and some of these we've already sort of covered.
Is Niraj in the room?
Unfortunately not, he couldn't make it.
Okay.
But he was gonna watch the recording. Hi, Niraj. Some of these we've already at least started to cover, like the dangling route destination. So we've got something that should cover that use. I believe Chiali has, I know Chiali has the same sort of thing. Yeah, there we go. Is that? I actually have a. It's probably not as nice as your list. I'll have to look at that link again. I know I've looked at that link before. Here's I thought a good summary when I wrote this doc was just kind of the list of error messages that
Yes.
y'all can output. There's a lot. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive, and it covers a lot of really useful stuff.
I think one big question is, do you think the framework is now at a place where we should go all out and write many analyzers, or do we need to fine-tune the framework a bit more before we go with that investment? So
my opinion is we're absolutely ready to just start writing analyzers, and as we run into issues, we can certainly tune the framework, but I think we've gotten the major pieces all in place that unblock us.
Great.
That's certainly my hope.
So how do we track that? Should we have a list of candidate things and start putting names and see who is interested? Because this is a great kind of work that anybody can pick up and start contributing one. So it's a matter of finding interested people.
Yes. Yes, my not so hidden motivation is also that I definitely want to get lots more people besides me writing these.
Yeah, it's fine. From Chiali team is something that for sure we want to collaborate. So I guess it's just how do you articulate these efforts? Is just to create some Istio issues for
Should
this
we-
field, something that we can assign to some teams, and just to be sure that the two
Yep.
teams are just writing the same analyzer, or to get some kind of.
Do you think
Yeah,
do you think something like having kind of a master issue, maybe linked to just like a spreadsheet, would make sense? Or
Create different issues for each.
Create
And
issues.
it can be assigned
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah.
okay,
You create an epic and you put all these things into an epic, and that's
Okay.
your master
Yeah.
thing.
I was thinking in an epic, something like that. Yeah, right.
okay. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and I'll take on that. I'll create the epic and try to initially populate it with some stuff. I will probably not get it right, and there will probably be things that need to be added or removed from that list. And so I will request, once I've got that in place, I will request everybody's help, kind of making sure that we have the right list of things, and that, you know, if there's something where it's like, yeah, we don't really need to do that one, or here's this other thing that we should absolutely be checking, let's make sure those get on there. It also seems likely that not all of this will make it into 1.4. We can't build all of this, I think, in quite that short a time, but I think we can make a good start at it. So thoughts on priority would also be helpful.
And also, you know, for something like adding analyzer, I think we can make a pretty good case for getting it in, you know, 1.4.1 and all of the smaller releases, what they call patch. So if we miss 1.4, it doesn't have to mean 1.5.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got 20 minutes left. I'm not entirely sure that's going to be enough time to actually walk through building an analyzer together. There's my notes. So if you guys, I can go ahead and create that epic today and start putting stuff up on there, and then you know, everybody who's interested in helping out, which is hopefully most of you, would be willing to pick one up and just start hammering at it. I will be very open and available as much as possible just to answer any questions or concerns that come up.
Is there a Slack channel we should be posting questions to?
Thank you. That's a great question. And yes, there is. There is a config-analysis Slack channel that we've created that would be the perfect place for this. So let me get that. There we go, config-analysis. So yes, please, if you have questions or comments, this is a great forum for it.
Good.
All right. Thank you guys. Really appreciate your time and your willingness to look at this and help us. I think this is actually going to be a really impactful for customers and for our users to be able to more easily do all this stuff. And we've had there's been some great tools out there, and I've been super impressed with Kiali and Istio just as you know, these are useful tools more people need to know about. And I'm hopeful that we can keep a lot of that work and that logic and just put it in a place where it is very accessible to people, and that we can use it in kind of a centralized location for everybody. And I think it's a really bright future to look forward to. All right.
Thanks for putting this together, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Edward.
much.